When you think about it, a young lady is pregnant. She wants to make an adoption plan because she thinks that's in the best interest of her child and herself. And she comes to an adoption agency. She, as a woman of color, has the right, as does a Caucasian woman, to choose the type of family that she wants to adopt her child. And if we don't have those type of families, there becomes an issue around that. So that's why it's so key that or that we as an organization go out into the community and address this need of African American families.
That was what our birth mom expressed a preference for. She wanted a married African American couple, preferably Christian. And so apparently the pool was so tiny that there were only 2 of us that were presented to her. And I don't suspect that that's terribly uncommon.
The Sayers Center is a program, an entity within the Cradle. The Sayers Center is a program in which any person or people who adopt African American children are a part of. My role with the Sayers Center is kind of twofold. My role is to go out into the community, to the African American community, and encourage African American families to adopt. So I introduce and educate adoption to these communities or to these families. The other role is to provide connectivity for our Caucasian families who have adopted African American children.
I have to tell you, until Sasha came home and said something about the Cradle and the Sayers program, I'd never even heard of anything specifically dedicated to adoption of African American children outside of maybe the foster care system. And then I think that's almost implicit. It seems as if that's the route people will go.
Up until January of 2012, the Sayers Center had a fee that was very different from that of our base domestic adoptions. And that fee was a lower fee, it was a reduced fee because of our need to place African American children. So we wanted to find as many families as we could who were open to parenting African American children. And that fee was paid by families, whether those families were African American families, Caucasian families, or Hispanic families or Asian families. We really started to recognize that our need was not, again, just parents, but our need was Black parents. So as a result, we changed that fee structure so that because our need is Black parents, only Black parents would pay that lower fee.
Some of the impact might be the finances, and so if indeed that is the case, then I definitely think it's always helpful to provide education and to provide initiatives.
How many married Black people do we know? How many married Black couples do we know?
Oh, that number is really small.
So that's what I actually think that the disconnect is actually a reflection of larger social issues.
We probably place about 40% of our children, maybe 45% of our children are Black children with Black families. When you compare that to other agencies, they may be around the 5 to 8 to 10% of placing Black children in Black households. So I think the Cradle has done a magnificent job.
We're matching a family that matches that child's individual needs. And so I think when you go from that approach, you're looking at a variety of ways in which you can find families for children. And so going from that approach, you can't really say just because a family is an African American family that they're going to be a good match for an African American child.
We have to be careful not to assume that simply because we're all Black, we all share the same cultural, all the same cultural markers. Black culture is not monolithic. So I think it's easy to kind of hang your hat on that and say, oh, they're Black, they're going to get it. Part of it is we read our story, how we grew up and the things that we were exposed to and whatever the case may be. So even then, just because you have a Black family doesn't necessarily always mean that you're going to get the same Black upbringing that you think you're going to get.